You're tuned in to 22 Crime, where the truth hides in the details. Together we dive into the darkest corners of human nature, exploring the mysteries that have left investigators puzzled and families searching for justice. Because in the world of crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems. The clock is ticking. Let's uncover the truth behind today's mystery. Imagine this: a young couple in love, a cross-country road trip, a van, and the promise of adventure. Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie were the embodiment of wanderlust, sharing their journey with the world through curated Instagram posts and YouTube videos. Their story captivated the public, until the day it turned into a nightmare. Today, we're peeling back the layers of their relationship, the ill-fated trip that ended in tragedy, and the emotional and legal aftermath that has left the world asking, could this have been prevented? Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie seemed like a couple many could aspire to be: young, adventurous, and deeply in love. Gabby, a 22-year-old woman from Blue Point, New York, met Brian Laundrie in high school. They began dating, moved in together in Northport, Florida, and soon got engaged. Both shared a passion for exploration, the kind of passion that led them to pursue a van life dream, documenting their adventures as they traversed the U.S. national parks. On the surface, their journey was picturesque. Gabby's social media posts were full of breathtaking landscapes, candid moments of life on the road, and cozy snapshots of their time together. The captions spoke of love and excitement, portraying an idyllic life. Their followers, along with family and friends, saw them as an adventurous couple living out the perfect Instagram-worthy dream. But what wasn't obvious through the filtered photos and polished videos was the growing tension beneath the surface. Friends of the couple began noticing small signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. One friend recalled that Brian could sometimes be possessive and controlling, though it wasn't always easy to tell from the outside. Another friend spoke of subtle changes in Gabby's demeanor, how she sometimes seemed anxious, nervous even, especially when they were around other people. It was easy to brush off these moments, convincing themselves it was just the stress of living on the road for months at a time. And then there was the pressure of their social media presence. Gabby was committed to making their adventure a success online, trying to build a travel blog and a YouTube channel to showcase their journey. Yet, behind the scenes, Brian wasn't fully supportive of her efforts. Gabby, always eager to share the beauty of their trip with the world, sometimes felt Brian wasn't as invested in her dreams. Their relationship, once full of promise and wanderlust, was now showing cracks under the weight of expectations, isolation, and personal struggles. The couple embarked on their cross-country van life adventure in July 2021. They traveled in Gabby's white Ford Transit van, starting from Florida, working their way through the West, visiting some of America's most iconic national parks. They documented their journey through social media posts, carefully curated to show the beauty of their surroundings and the love they shared. But behind the smiles and the stunning backdrops, something darker was brewing. By late August, those cracks in their relationship started to become more apparent, though not publicly at first. On August 12, 2021, a significant moment occurred, one that would later be replayed on news channels across the country. It was the now infamous police stop in Moab, Utah, captured on body cam footage. The couple had been involved in a domestic dispute, and concerned witnesses had called the police after seeing a physical altercation between Gabby and Brian. Imagine the scene: the heat of the Utah desert, a police car pulls up behind a white van. Sirens wail, and in the distance, two young adults, Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito, sit nervously inside. It's a moment etched in the national memory, captured by police body cam footage. But what did we really see that day? Beneath Brian's calm exterior and Gabby's visible distress lies a much darker dynamic. Today, we'll explore Brian Laundrie's body language during that fateful police encounter and the subtle signs of manipulation and emotional control, as analyzed by a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert. It was a scorching day in Moab, Utah. The landscape, rugged and dusty, mirrored the tension simmering between Brian and Gabby. Their white van, a temporary home during their cross-country trip, had been pulled over by the police after a concerned citizen called 911, reporting what appeared to be a domestic disturbance. As the police car came to a stop, its lights flashing in the rearview mirror, you could almost feel the anxiety radiating from the van. Inside, Gabby sat hunched over, her voice trembling as she spoke to the officers. Meanwhile, Brian, calm, composed, apologized profusely, a man seemingly intent on smoothing over any misunderstandings. The police officers separated the couple, speaking to them individually to get a clearer sense of what had happened. Gabby, still visibly upset, explained that they had been fighting. She was tearful, her words spilling out in quick, nervous bursts as she admitted that she had been stressed. "I have OCD sometimes, and I just get really frustrated," she confessed, as if apologizing for her own emotions. Brian, on the other hand, stood apart from the situation, physically and emotionally. He described their conflict with an eerie calmness, brushing off Gabby's distress as a typical relationship spat. He emphasized how he had tried to defuse the situation, mentioning that he asked Gabby to take a breather to calm down. It was all so reasonable, so composed. But as experts would later analyze, beneath the surface, Brian's body language and behavior hinted at something far more manipulative. An expert in both psychology and body language provides a key insight into the subtle, almost imperceptible dynamics at play during the police encounter. From the moment Brian steps out of the van, he is performing. His body language is deliberate, calm, submissive, almost deferential to the officers. He uses this to build rapport, to appear harmless. The footage shows Brian standing with his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands in front of him in a non-threatening gesture. This posture is designed to signal compliance. He's telling the officers through his body language that he is no threat, that he is cooperative. Yet, this submission is not genuine vulnerability, it's a mask. One of the key moments in the footage comes when the officer asks Brian about the scratches on his face. Brian doesn't flinch. He smoothly explains that Gabby had scratched him, but he quickly downplays the altercation, saying that he only tried to protect himself. "I wasn't trying to hurt her," Brian says, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. Experts point out that this is a classic tactic used by manipulators, presenting oneself as the victim while subtly shifting the blame onto the other person. Notice how Brian is very calm while he describes the conflict. He's not emotional about it, which might seem like a good thing. But in a situation like this, where there's been physical conflict, you would expect some kind of emotional response. Anger, frustration, something. Brian shows none of that. Instead, he's methodical, almost detached. That's a red flag. Meanwhile, Gabby's body language tells a different story. From the moment she steps out of the van, her distress is palpable. She is jittery, her hands fidgeting, her voice cracking as she explains the argument. "I was distracting him from driving," she says, almost blaming herself for what happened. It's as if Gabby is taking on the emotional weight of the entire situation, something that victims of emotional manipulation often do. Gabby is overwhelmed by the conflict, and you can see it in her body language. She's small, almost trying to make herself invisible. She's tearful and apologetic. Brian, on the other hand, is composed. He's controlling the narrative by controlling his emotions. It's a chilling dynamic, especially when you consider how these roles often play out in abusive relationships. As the police officers continue to question Brian, he maintains his calm demeanor, answering their questions with practiced ease. He emphasizes how he was trying to de-escalate the situation, subtly framing Gabby as the one who was worked up. This is part of a larger pattern often seen in abusive relationships. Brian's behavior is what we call impression management. He's trying to manage how the police perceive him. By staying calm and agreeable, he's positioning himself as the rational one, the level-headed one. Meanwhile, Gabby, who is emotional and upset, can easily be painted as the unstable partner. This is classic manipulation. At one point, Brian even laughs nervously with the officers, joking about the situation as if it's a misunderstanding that has already been smoothed over. This is another red flag. He's not taking the situation seriously because he believes he's already won the officers over. His confidence is alarming, especially considering the gravity of the situation. Gabby, in contrast, is still trying to explain herself, as if she's desperate for someone to understand her side of the story. This is where the psychological dynamic becomes really troubling. Brian is in control, not just of the situation but of Gabby's emotions. You can see it in the way she talks about their argument. She's blaming herself, minimizing his role in the conflict. That's a sign of someone who has been emotionally manipulated. Throughout the footage, Brian subtly shifts the blame onto Gabby. He describes her as the one who got worked up and even implies that her behavior is unpredictable, citing her OCD as a factor. This tactic, known as gaslighting, is common in emotionally abusive relationships. By making Gabby seem unstable or irrational, Brian is able to position himself as the more reasonable, calm partner. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of emotional abuse. It's designed to make the victim doubt their own reality, to question their emotions and perceptions. Brian is doing this by framing Gabby's emotions as the problem. He's making it seem like she's the one who can't control herself, when in reality, he's controlling the entire situation. Gabby's response to this manipulation is heart-wrenching. She apologizes repeatedly, both to the officers and indirectly to Brian. "I was just stressed," she says, her voice quivering. This is another hallmark of emotional abuse. The victim takes on the blame, internalizing the idea that they are the problem. It's heartbreaking to watch. Gabby is clearly overwhelmed, and yet she's apologizing for her emotions. She's trying to make herself small, to disappear, while Brian is controlling the narrative. This is the kind of psychological power play that we see in abusive relationships, where the abuser uses calmness and logic to make the victim seem unstable or irrational. As we watch the footage now, with the benefit of hindsight, it's impossible not to ask the question, could this encounter have changed the course of events? What if the police had seen through Brian's calm facade? What if they had recognized the signs of manipulation and emotional abuse? Could Gabby's life have been saved? It's easy to speculate after the fact, but in the moment, recognizing manipulation is incredibly difficult. Manipulators are often skilled at hiding their true intentions. They know how to present themselves as the reasonable party, as the one in control, while their victim is left appearing emotional or irrational. It's a dynamic that's hard to spot, especially for people who aren't trained to recognize it. This raises a broader question about how we, as a society, can better recognize the signs of emotional manipulation and abuse. Body language analysis is one tool, but it's also about understanding the psychological dynamics at play. It's about looking beyond what's being said and paying attention to the emotional context of the situation. In the end, the police encounter with Brian and Gabby serves as a tragic reminder of how easily manipulation can go unnoticed. Brian's calm demeanor, his carefully constructed narrative, and his subtle shifting of blame all played a role in masking the true nature of their relationship. And for Gabby, who was visibly distressed and emotionally overwhelmed, the help she so desperately needed slipped through her fingers. It's clear that Brian Laundrie's manipulation extended far beyond his relationship with Gabby. His ability to control the narrative, to mask his true intentions, and to manipulate those around him ultimately contributed to the tragic end of Gabby's life. The encounter with the police could have been a turning point, an opportunity for intervention that, tragically, was missed. But by understanding the signs of manipulation and learning to read the subtle cues in body language and behavior, we can hope to prevent similar tragedies in the future. So, what can we take away from this? If you or someone you know is in a situation where emotional manipulation or abuse is at play, don't ignore the signs. Trust your instincts, and remember that calmness in the face of conflict doesn't always mean innocence. Sometimes it's the very thing hiding the truth. In the days leading up to Gabby Petito's tragic death, there were crucial moments that, with hindsight, paint a haunting picture of Brian Laundrie's psychological state. From the mundane activity of shopping for groceries to his subtle but telling body language, these final days hint at a mind wrestling with its darkest thoughts. Let's start with the CCTV footage captured from a local grocery store, one of the last public appearances of Gabby and Brian together. On the surface, the footage seems almost banal, an everyday activity shared by countless couples. But under that veil of normalcy lurked a growing tension, invisible to the casual observer but undeniably present when you dig deeper into Brian's behavior. As they walked through the aisles, there were no raised voices or obvious signs of conflict. Gabby had her arms crossed, a gesture often interpreted as a protective or defensive posture. It could be seen as an attempt to shield herself emotionally or physically from the simmering tension. Meanwhile, Brian's hands were buried deep in his pockets. This small detail may seem inconsequential to the average person, but body language experts recognize this gesture as significant. A body language expert analyzed the footage, pointing out that when people are anxious or wish to avoid drawing attention, they tend to minimize their movements. The primal instinct is to hide, to become smaller, less noticeable. Brian, with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, was embodying that very instinct. The question is, what was he trying to hide? As the expert explains, it's not just that he's walking around with his hands in his pockets. His hands are fully submerged, as if he's trying to suppress something, not just physically but emotionally. This kind of behavior could signal internal anxiety, a mounting pressure building inside him as he potentially grappled with what he was about to do. Forensic psychologists often point to subtle cues in body language as markers of premeditation. It's worth considering, was Brian already contemplating murder at this point? Did he know, as they wandered the aisles of that grocery store, that these were the final hours of Gabby's life? Was the act already planned, the mental groundwork already laid, even while they were performing such an ordinary task? The expert further highlights the concept of hiding in plain sight. Manipulators like Brian are often adept at presenting a calm, collected exterior, even when their inner world is in turmoil. This ability to suppress emotions, to maintain composure when others might break, is what makes people like Brian so dangerous. It's what allows them to carry out their acts without raising immediate suspicion. Brian's behavior in the grocery store mirrors his interactions with police from earlier footage, where he managed to appear cooperative, deferential, and even apologetic. There's a chilling similarity between the two, an individual playing the part of the nice guy, maintaining the appearance of innocence while hiding darker intentions beneath the surface. Let's break down another key moment from that grocery store footage. As Brian moves through the store, his lack of eye contact stands out. He keeps his head down, avoiding engagement with the world around him. This could be read as a man lost in thought, but given what transpired later, it's possible he was mentally withdrawing, focusing inward as he calculated his next steps. Body language experts often say that avoidance of eye contact, particularly in situations where social interaction would be expected, can be a red flag. People who are carrying a burden, especially one as sinister as the one Brian likely held at this point, tend to disengage from their surroundings. There's a kind of tunnel vision that sets in, where their focus becomes entirely internalized. This behavior raises a critical question: was the murder premeditated? According to the expert, there's evidence in Brian's demeanor that suggests he had, at the very least, been considering this for some time. The way he carries himself, the lack of interaction, the way he keeps his body small and his hands tucked away, it's all indicative of someone who is trying to disappear, and this could mean he had already decided on a course of action, and in his mind, he was preparing for it. Brian's calculated calmness, combined with his withdrawal from Gabby and the world around him, paints a picture of someone who was not acting impulsively. It's important to note that premeditation doesn't necessarily mean detailed planning over days or weeks. In many cases, it can be a decision that forms and hardens within a matter of hours. What's critical is the shift in mindset, the moment when a person moves from contemplation to action. As the host, I can't help but reflect on how deeply unsettling this realization is. These final days of Gabby's life weren't marked by explosive fights or overt violence in public. Instead, they were punctuated by moments like this, quiet, subtle behaviors that, at the time, didn't seem to warrant alarm but now stand as indicators of something far more sinister. What we see in Brian's behavior is a slow unraveling of whatever internal restraint he had left. Perhaps he had already made up his mind before they even entered the grocery store. Maybe, in his mind, the decision was already final, and what followed was merely a matter of timing. For many of us, it's hard to grasp the idea of premeditation. How can someone go through the motions of everyday life, grocery shopping, smiling, engaging in casual conversations, while simultaneously planning to take the life of someone they profess to love? It's this cognitive dissonance that makes cases like this so difficult to comprehend. The juxtaposition of normalcy and impending tragedy is what leaves such a deep psychological scar, not just on the victims' families, but on all of us as observers of human behavior. But this is the nature of manipulators. They are often masters at blending in. They know how to suppress their true feelings, how to perform the role that others expect of them while hiding their real intentions. In Brian's case, this ability to mask his emotions, to remain outwardly calm, gave him the upper hand. His demeanor in those final days didn't raise enough red flags to warrant immediate intervention. And that is part of what makes this case so devastating. There were signs, but they were too subtle for anyone to act upon in time. In retrospect, we can see how Brian's behavior in the grocery store, though seemingly mundane, was layered with meaning. His anxiety, his desire to blend in, his avoidance of engagement, all point to someone hiding something monumental. Whether he had already decided on the murder or was still contemplating it, his body language gave us a glimpse into the darkness of his mind. As we continue to explore this tragic case, it's crucial to remember that the signs of manipulation and premeditation are often subtle. They're easy to miss in real time, but they're there. The lesson for all of us is to trust our instincts and be aware of these subtle shifts in behavior. Because sometimes, it's the quietest moments that reveal the most. By the end of August, communication between Gabby and her family had grown scarce. Her last known contact was on August 25, 2021, when she spoke to her mother via video call. In that conversation, Gabby mentioned they were headed toward Wyoming's Grand Teton National Park, but she seemed stressed, though she didn't say much about why. After that call, her texts became less frequent. Her family received her last text message on August 30th, but something about it didn't feel right. It was short and out of character, leading her mother to believe it hadn't been sent by Gabby at all. The public search for Gabby began after she was officially reported missing on September 11, 2021, 10 days after her fiancé returned to Florida, alone, driving the van they had shared. Brian's arrival without Gabby sent up immediate red flags for her family and soon for the rest of the country. How could he return alone from a trip they had so publicly embarked on together? The Petito family, desperate for answers, pleaded for any information about their daughter's whereabouts, but from the Laundrie family there was silence. And then came the discovery that broke the hearts of millions following the case. On September 19, 2021, Gabby's body was found in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. The coroner ruled the cause of death as homicide, later confirming that she had died by strangulation. The vibrant young woman who had captured the hearts of so many was gone. As the Petito family mourned their daughter, the focus quickly shifted to Brian Laundrie. By the time Gabby's body was discovered, Brian was already missing, having left his parents' home on September 13th. He told them he was going for a hike in the Carlton Reserve, a vast and dense wilderness area near their home in Northport. Days turned into weeks, and a nationwide manhunt for Brian Laundrie began, with law enforcement and the media intensifying the search. The story became a daily fixture in news cycles, with updates pouring in about possible sightings and leads, but no trace of Brian. Finally, on October 20, 2021, after nearly a month of searching, Brian Laundrie's remains were found in the Carlton Reserve. He had died by suicide, leaving behind only questions. A notebook discovered near his remains would later reveal his confession to killing Gabby, providing a grim confirmation of what everyone had feared. But for Gabby's family, the search for answers wasn't over. In March 2022, they filed a civil lawsuit against Brian Laundrie's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie. The suit alleged that the Laundrie family knew about Gabby's murder long before the public did, and intentionally withheld information that could have helped locate Gabby's body sooner. The Petito family claimed that the Laundrie's silence during the crucial days of the search caused them severe emotional distress, and the legal battle that followed would open up even more questions about the limits of responsibility, morality, and legality. As the Gabby Petito case unfolded, the legal battle between the Petito and Laundrie families reached a boiling point in the courtroom. Both sides came armed with sharp legal minds, emotional testimonies, and deep conviction in their positions. We will focus on the expert testimonies, the legal tactics employed, and the heart-wrenching narratives presented during this legal confrontation. From the outset, Brian Laundrie's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, were placed in a difficult legal position. The Petito family's lawsuit alleged that the Laundries had caused intentional emotional distress by withholding critical information about Gabby's whereabouts, all while the world searched for her. Central to the case was one profound question: could the Laundries be legally compelled to share what they knew about Gabby's fate, or were they protected under the law by their right to remain silent? The Laundries' defense was clear and consistent. Their legal team, led by attorney Matthew Luca, leaned heavily on the concept of constitutional rights, particularly the First and Fifth Amendments. They argued that under the U.S. Constitution, individuals are not legally obligated to speak, even in situations where their silence may cause pain. This was their fundamental shield against the emotional distress claims filed by the Petito family. In his opening arguments, Luca pointed out that the Laundries were within their rights to remain silent, citing both state and federal laws. He maintained that there is no legal duty to disclose information, and that the silence of the Laundries, however painful it may have been for the Petito family, was not illegal. He framed the case as one of constitutional integrity, saying, "In our society, under our laws, people are free not to speak. The Laundrie's silence is protected by the Constitution. We cannot impose a legal obligation to speak, and the plaintiff's emotional distress, however understandable, does not override those rights." Luca's defense strategy was built on the assertion that silence itself is not an action that can be considered outrageous under Florida law. He referenced legal precedents where the courts had ruled that choosing to remain silent, even in the face of tragedy, did not meet the high legal standard for outrageousness necessary to prove intentional infliction of emotional distress. This legal tactic, however sound in its construction, only intensified the emotional atmosphere in the courtroom. While Luca and the Laundries sought to uphold their legal rights, the Petito family, and much of the public, saw this as a question of morality. How could parents stay silent while another family desperately searched for their missing daughter? On the other side of the courtroom stood Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's parents, who fought with every ounce of their strength to make the Laundries answer for what they believed was a grievous moral failing. Their legal team framed the case not as a constitutional debate, but as one of basic human decency and empathy. The courtroom was filled with emotional moments, none more gut-wrenching than the testimonies from Gabby's parents. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, took the stand and recounted the agony of searching for her daughter for weeks, while the Laundries refused to say a word. Her voice trembled as she described how they had reached out to the Laundries, begging for information, any information about Gabby's whereabouts. "We were desperate. We called, we pleaded, but they said nothing. They knew where she was. They could have told us. Instead, they let us live in agony, wondering if our daughter was still alive." In that moment, the courtroom was silent. The jury, the audience, even the Laundries themselves seemed gripped by the emotional weight of Nicole's words. The pain in her voice was undeniable, a raw display of parental love and anguish. Her testimony laid bare what was at stake in this trial, not just legal principles, but the human toll of silence. Joseph Petito's testimony was equally powerful. He spoke about the night spent lying awake, unable to sleep, haunted by the thought of his daughter lost and alone in the wilderness. He recounted the moment they found out that Gabby was dead, and how their grief was compounded by the knowledge that the Laundries had known all along. "They went on vacation, knowing our daughter was gone. They had dinner, they laughed, while we were living a nightmare. How do you do that? How do you live with yourself? The Petito family's case hinged not just on the facts, but on the emotional truth that had been laid bare for the court. Their argument was simple yet profound. The Laundrie's silence wasn't just a legal right, it was a moral wrong. The courtroom drama unfolded as both sides sparred over a complex legal question. Can silence, when it results in emotional harm, be legally actionable? Luca, representing the Laundries, argued that it could not. He cited Florida law, which defines intentional infliction of emotional distress as requiring conduct so outrageous and atrocious that it goes beyond all bounds of decency. Luca insisted that silence, particularly when legally protected, could never meet that standard. Remaining silent is not a crime, it is not outrageous, it is not illegal. The Laundries were well within their rights and no precedent exists that says otherwise. In response, the Petito's lawyer, Patrick Riley, contended that the context of the Laundrie's silence made it outrageous. He pointed to the fact that the Laundrie's son, Brian, had likely confessed to them about Gabby's death. Knowing this, and still choosing to remain silent while the Petitos searched in vain, was, in his view, an act of profound cruelty. Riley drew on case law that allowed for exceptions to the general rule of silence. He referenced cases where emotional distress claims were allowed when individuals withheld critical information during times of great emotional vulnerability, such as the loss of a loved one. One particular case involved an insurance company that delayed payment to a dying patient, intentionally causing distress. Riley argued that the Laundrie's silence was equally calculated and harmful. This is not just silence. This is silence in the face of a family suffering, knowing full well that their daughter was already dead. It was a deliberate decision to withhold information that could have ended the Petitos' agony. The back and forth between both legal teams highlighted the tension between legal rights and moral obligations. Could a family be held liable for simply exercising their right to remain silent? Or, as the Petitos argued, did their failure to speak cross a line into emotional and psychological cruelty? As I reflect on the courtroom exchanges, I'm struck by the profound legal and ethical questions that this case raises. Where do we draw the line between what is legally permissible and what is morally right? On one hand, the Laundrie's legal team is correct in asserting that silence is a constitutional right. It's a cornerstone of American law that individuals cannot be compelled to incriminate themselves or speak when they choose not to. The Fifth Amendment exists for good reason, and to erode that right could have serious implications for future legal cases. But then, on the other hand, we have the Petitos argument, a deeply human appeal to compassion and empathy. There's no denying the profound emotional harm caused by the Laundrie's silence. Their refusal to speak wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a decision that prolonged the Petito family's suffering in ways that are hard to fathom. As a host, it's difficult to balance these two perspectives. What do we value more, the sanctity of constitutional rights or the moral responsibility we have to each other in times of tragedy? Can the law be both rigid and compassionate, or must it always choose between the two? The Petito case forces us to confront these uncomfortable questions, leaving us to wonder, when it comes to justice, is there room for both legal correctness and moral accountability? This is the crux of the case, and it's what makes this trial so compelling. The outcome of this lawsuit will likely set a precedent, not just for the families involved, but for how we understand the intersection of law, silence, and emotional harm. It asks us to look deeply into ourselves and our justice system and decide what kind of society we want to be, one that protects legal rights at all costs, or one that makes room for compassion, even when the law says otherwise. As we reach the conclusion of this complex and emotional case, it's crucial to reflect on what we've learned from the legal battles, the psychological insights, and the heart-wrenching personal journeys of those involved. The Gabby Petito story continues to resonate with so many because it encapsulates not just the tragedy of a life lost too soon, but also the complicated legal and moral dilemmas that surround the search for justice. From the lawsuit filed by Gabby's parents, Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, against Brian Laundrie's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, to the psychological analyses of Brian's body language, we've been given a rare and unsettling look into how people behave under extreme emotional and legal pressures. Let's take a moment to summarize these key points, reflect on the larger questions they raise, and consider what this means for society at large. Gabby Petito's story raises profound questions about our societal responsibilities. One of the most significant is the moral obligation to speak out when we know something is wrong. The Laundrie's silence, whether legal or not, has been widely criticized in the court of public opinion. Many argue that when a person's life is at stake, silence becomes complicity. But where do we draw the line? At what point does moral duty outweigh legal rights? These are difficult questions, and ones that we, as a society, will continue to grapple with. There's also the broader issue of balancing constitutional rights with ethical responsibility. The Fifth Amendment grants individuals the right to remain silent to protect themselves from self-incrimination. It's a fundamental part of the U.S. legal system, ensuring that no one is forced to speak against their own interests. But when a crime as devastating as murder is involved, the ethical dilemmas become thornier. Does exercising that right make a person morally culpable, even if legally they are in the clear? The Gabby Petito case forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths. In a world where social media amplifies every twist and turn of a case like this, we also must consider the role of public scrutiny. The Laundrie family, while exercising their legal rights, became the target of immense public hatred and speculation. The constant media coverage and social media outrage not only placed them under a microscope, but also blurred the lines between justice and public opinion. How do we balance the right to a fair legal process with the relentless demand for answers in the digital age? As we reflect on the tragic death of Gabby Petito and the legal battles that followed, one thing remains clear: the pain and suffering of both families will never fully go away. The Petito family lost their beloved daughter, and the Laundries lost their son, both under the most horrific circumstances imaginable. Their lives are forever intertwined by tragedy. Gabby's story has touched countless people around the world, shining a spotlight on domestic violence and the devastating consequences it can have. If there's one positive thing that can come from this, it's the increased awareness of the warning signs of abusive relationships and the importance of early intervention. Before we close, I want to emphasize that help is always available. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please don't hesitate to reach out to organizations like the National Domestic Violence Hotline or local shelters and support groups. Your life matters, and you don't have to go through this alone. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you've made it to this point, drop a comment with the word "done," and we'll give you a personal shout-out to show our appreciation. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive in this murder and media frenzy. It was as fascinating for us to create as we hope it was for you to hear. If you found this episode thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We also invite you to join our YouTube channel, where you can get early access to our content, have your questions answered directly, and enjoy exclusive members-only content. We'd love to know what you think about this case. Was justice truly served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're always eager to hear your thoughts. For those wanting to explore more on true crime, we've included Amazon affiliate links to some of the books we referenced in our research. Purchasing through the link won't cost you anything extra, but it will support the channel and help us continue bringing you more content. If you're craving even more, consider joining our Patreon community. As a member, you'll get access to the full script of this episode, exclusive book summaries, and even the complete set of images featured in this case, available for purchase in our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.